Down in Petersburg, everything's fine. All them cats is drinking that wine. Drinking that mess is their delight. When you get drunk, start singing all night. Drinking wine's for you to drink wine. Wine's for you to drink wine. Wine's for you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Drinking that mess is their delight.
Welcome to another episode of Tasting Anarchy, your only Liberty wine show on the internet waves. I am Jacob Lindsay. As always, I'm joined by
Mason Joseph.
And I think we've got a pretty good show for you this week. I will admit that I am slightly underprepared, just because it's been sort of a slow week for wine news, but there's been some other kind of interesting news, so we'll get into that. I do have one item that is wine-related and one kind of quirky item that I just thought was interesting. And Mason, I know you brought up a food-related item that I thought we might discuss as well. But let's go ahead and get into the wine first. This week it is your wine. What are you sipping on?
So I am sipping on what I think is my second bottle of the same wine, but this bottle tastes different than my memory of the last bottle, so I have to dig through the recycle and figure it out probably tomorrow. So as you know, I like to shop at Kroger, and in love of Nate, I take his wine suggestions almost as seriously as I take Jackson's, which is to say very seriously for both. So Viognier is something that I'm wanting to get into. And so, as people on the show may remember, there was the mystery wine that my wife and I had, and we couldn't figure it out. We know the winery, but we weren't really sure what it is. I come to think it's a Viognier from Williamsburg Winery. I have a bottle of it in the house. I just haven't gotten into. But this is the Tarara Winery out of Leesburg, Virginia, which is northern Virginia, kind of in the mountains. I'm not 100%, but it's their 2015 Viognier, 13.3% alcohol by volume, 3.62 pH, 100% stainless steel fermentation. Now, Jacob, this bottle, according to several of the wine sites, $30, $28 on their so like I found their, press page for the wine, which when you go to their website, doesn't really have a lot about it, but the press page is like awesome. It's got a bunch of notes about a bunch of different stuff. So if you had lived locally still, I've been like, we got to track down a bunch more from these guys, because they had notes on kind of all of the varietals that they grow on like the harvest and things like that. But this one, supposedly $30 bottle of wine, Kroger says 19.49. I got it for $12.38.
Oh, that's a very good deal. If what is online is to be believed, that's an outstanding deal. I mean, that's wait, what is that? That's $18 savings?
Yeah, something like that. Wow. So my complaint about this one is it's much more Chardonnay tasting than I remember the last bottle.
Okay.
Now, again, might not have the right bottle, but I'll also say I have drank almost the entire bottle today. I have the last of it in a glass. So, maybe my flavors are a little off, but golden in color. You can taste the acidity, which is a little strong, but apparently there's like 0% residual sugars. But it's not, like with the cabs and stuff where you have that, I want to call it tart, but it's the tannicness, the kind of the acidity, the punch up front. This still has a white wine fruit flavor.
Got it.
But the acidity is there. So I'm going to take another sip and see if I can get a little bit on it. Are you sipping on anything?
I am. I've got, and I'll tell you, I hate giving bad reviews on things. I've got, a Bordeaux.
Oh my!
Yeah, it's La Tonnelle Haut Medoc. I got it because it was on sale at Total Wine, $14.99 as opposed to its normal price, which is $19.99. It's Haut Medoc. I was like, okay, well, this is going to be sort of like the ones that we had with Jackson. I got it, and just nowhere near as. The best way I can describe the other ones was nowhere near as refined. So those had a very refined flavor. A lot of stuff. It was very smooth, very subtle. This one is just a punch in the tongue. So, which is weird. Now that I got it. This is actually a perfect time for me to transition into talking about this a little bit. Victoria got me a pretty cool gift. It's called Ullo or Ullo. I'm not sure exactly how to say it. And it is a wine filter. So it has these little filter packs. It's like, feels like it's kind of full of sand or something like that. And you put it on, and I looked and read some reviews on it. There's some mixed reviews, but for the most part, people are like, no, this legitimately works. It does filter out things like sulfites, which are added to wine a lot of times for preservative purposes. It helps wine age better. But there's other additives as well. So this filters out a lot of those and kind of gives you a more pure wine. It's also supposed to help reduce the hangover that's associated with drinking too much wine. And after our last episode, the New Year's episode, I started kind of examining my life and going, I really need some sort of hangover reduction thing, or I just need to drink less. So,
well, or, you need to go to the greasy spoon in the morning.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. But so I went ahead, I had one small glass of this without the filter and just, really attacked me.
Well, let me ask some questions.
Okay.
So one of the things that we learned from Jackson is that wine does need to be opened up. And this Tarara Winery does suggest that in the, putting it in a decanter or something like that, 20 minutes or so.
Yeah.
Did you let this open up at all?
No. And I'm actually getting to that
but
part of it.
But did you use your aerator?
No, and this is what I'm getting to on it. Okay. So the first glass just didn't care for it, and I was like, man, I wasted $14 or $15 on this. It's $14.99. So, but then I was like, you know what? This is a good opportunity for me to try this filter because now I've tried it without it, and now let me try it with my old aerator that you and I have used before. So I used my old aerator, a little better, but still not great. I went ahead and put it through this filter, and the filter doubles as an aerator as well, and it's a much slower aerator than the one that I had before. So this is like you fill up the top portion of it and it slowly goes through the aerator portion of this device. And like Victoria was there and she was very anxious to see if it was like a good deal because it's expensive. It's like $90.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's not a cheap thing. And or maybe it's $80 and then the filters were an addition. I don't remember. I can look up the prices later. But, anyways, so I put it through this thing, and I'm not expecting much, but one of the things I noticed when I pulled the filter off the top of the glass is that it's much, much more aromatic. There's a lot more smells coming from it, a lot less of the alcohol-y smell, a lot more fruit flavors of dark fruits, kind of a little bit of loaminess to it. And I was like, wow, it actually smells a lot better now, but it may be just because it was stirred up and put through this aerator portion. And I took a sip, like a remarkably improved flavor. It had gotten rid of a lot of that like harsh, not even acidic. It was like a bad match between acidicness and tannicness in it. That was kind of the problem with it. And having it gone through this filter and aerated, I guess, is what helped with it. Really mellowed it out and made it a lot better tasting. It still wasn't great compared to the other Bordeaux that we had with Jackson, which I think everybody can go hear that episode. I don't remember exactly which one, but it's in the 30s. But not as good as that, but still a lot better. And then I started kind of examining the bottle a little bit, and it turns out that this is a different blend than the Bordeaux blends we had. Yeah, so this is Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, and Petit Verdot. The other one we had was Cabernet Sauvignon, Merlot, Petit Verdot, and Cab Franc. And so the Cab Franc, I think, is a much more, and I think I said this last episode, and I still haven't recorded it yet. I've got a mini episode where I'm going to kind of examine terroir a little bit and compare 4 different Cab Francs that I've tried in the last 2 weeks. And I think that this is I'm going to be able to kind of give a little bit of a showcase on this here is Cab Franc does have is a good wine to blend with Cab Sauv, I think, even though Cab Sauv is derived partially from Cab Franc, because it does have the tannicness, but it's not as, for lack of a better way of putting it, it's not as young tasting. It tastes much more mellow, much more smooth typically than a Cab Sauv. The other difference between this Bordeaux and the one that we had before is that this is a 2016. The one you and I had together was a 2015, and then the one I had previously, which was the same vineyard and same company as the one you and I had from 2015, was a 2014. And I did think the 2014 was much better than the 2015. So now I've got a 2016, so it may be an age thing.
It may be. They also put a vintage on it, so that, that leads me to believe that they were not satisfied, but proud of the work. So this would be something Jackson, presuming that you get an opportunity to listen to this episode, love to hear your thoughts on it, especially if coordinate some sort of response or something like that. Maybe do maybe if Jackson can record a mini episode kind of commenting on it, that'd be fun.
Yeah.
But yeah, that is really interesting that, because it seems like with the Bordeaux, at least from your perspective, because I only had the one, which I did much enjoy.
Yeah.
And I could definitely taste the professionalness of it.
Yeah.
That kind of like, we know what we're doing.
Yeah. It tasted like it tasted experienced. Like they knew what was up.
Yeah, and our understanding, and maybe Jackson can correct us a little bit, but the French don't generally super age the wine. So I wonder if we went to that area, if you would be if that's what Bordeaux tastes like in the average French person's mind. Yeah. Kind of more punchy and I'm making fisticuff. Hand motions. But yeah, that's really interesting. And what I'd almost like to, what would be great is if you could say, eat a little bit of dry salami, have the wine just opened and drink a half a glass, then use your original aerator, drink a half a glass, and do something in between. So each thing is kind of presenting the same position. Right. And try all of those, and then, try ultimately just opening it up and seeing if it's no, this is one of those ones that it just needs to be opened up and it's going to present different ways. And does that filter do something different? I mean, an interesting idea, on the filter. It kind of makes me think of when you're reading the wine labels and they're like, oh, the state of California knows sulfates to cause cancer, so don't drink this. Right.
Well, and that's one of the things. Victoria and I were actually just talking about it before we started the show. The actual filters that you add to it, because they're bought separately from the device itself, and you replace them. One filter is good for one bottle.
Oh, wow.
But the problem is I don't drink one bottle at a time most of the time. Usually I drink a bottle over 2 or 3 days. And it says that you are also not supposed to let the filter dry out once you've used it. So I'm not sure what to do about that. And the filters themselves are about $2 each. So it does end up being kind of expensive. I was thinking about maybe using it as an aerator, because the aerator portion, I also use it tonight just to see what it was like without a filter. And the aerator itself, the filter does make a difference. And I don't know if that's because going through that sand and stuff like that is getting more oxygen and stuff into it, or if it is physically removing these quote unquote impurities that change the flavor or make it more harsh or whatever. But it was better going through the aerator portion of the device without a filter than it is going through my old aerator. The other thing that I thought was interesting about this wine in particular was that if you go through all of the Total Wine reviews on it, there's a very decent handful of people with lots of reviews who say this is a difficult wine at first, but if you leave it out for about an hour in a decanter, it gets much, much better, and it's much more interesting, and it's a lot more smooth. So I think that my aerator has helped a little bit. It would be interesting to try this also, the decanter, and see what the difference would be between decanting it or just leaving it out in the glass for an hour versus going through the old aerator, going through the new aerator, and then also going through the new aerator with the filter. It's just, you and me both like these kind of experiment type things where it's like this way with this way with this and this way with this other thing, that kind of thing.
So, just real quick on mine.
Yeah, mine was sort of an aside, and we spent forever talking about it.
but it was, so one of the things that I would like to point out about wine, and this is, so you get guys like Jackson who know what they're talking about, and it's clear from experience and not necessarily always reading. I won't say Jackson isn't well read on wine, but you can tell from the actual taste and flavor, he does know what he's talking about. And then you get the people, not people, but kind of the shortcut. Yeah. So instead of just enjoying that bottle of wine straight like we normally would, now you've put in all these gadgets. And it kind of feels to me like those, so there's in the Venture Brothers, which is a fantastically funny Cartoon Network series or Adult Swim series for those who haven't watched it. There's this guy called the Outrider. And he is ahead, he's way above his former teacher, and he took a shortcut by implanting a device in his head. And so to me, it's kind of one of those, is that device one of those things where like, is there specific situations where that device truly does improve the situation? Or is it one of those things where it's like, oh, this is just a way to get around your novelness in wine, you know, like kind of like, oh, it's $90, so it must be good.
That is a difficult thing. And, you know, Victoria got it for me for Christmas because for New Year's, mostly just because when we were at the store, I was like, I'd like to try this, but I don't want to try it for $90. Whereas, and now she's working, she makes a decent amount of money. So she's like, I want to get him something that's interesting to him. And this is definitely super interesting to me. And I may not end up using it all the time, or I may only use it like when you come visit or when Nate comes there or visit. And when we're going to open up a bottle or open up 2 bottles, and I can run the entire bottle through the filter, and have it in aerated and decanted and all that sort of stuff. But we'll see what happens. But kind of going back to your wine, because I want to share something a little bit about the varietal when you're done talking about yours.
Let me give the tasting notes, which I think kind of fit pretty well. The wine has some yin and yang feel to it. The aromas come across the board from simple citrus and pretty notes to cantaloupe, honey, and mango tones, and a slight classic peach pit characteristic. The palate has telltale Viognier viscosity, which I really am picking up on, while remaining fresh and long. Long, not necessarily fresh for sure. This is great summer sipping VO. I really agree. It is a wonderful summer flavor to it. It has a lot of Chardonnay feel to it, and I don't know if it's, it could be 85% Viognier and 15% Chardonnay, and they wouldn't have to tell you that. Though they do seem to kind of give you some pretty strong statistics on the site. So my understanding is, it is straight Viognier. Viognier might not be one that they mix generally, but like they've got the dates harvested. They tell you about the 3 different vineyards it's harvested from. So I'm imagining if it was cut with something, they'd probably give you a little bit of that. But I don't want to use the word ethereal, but it's kind of missing from maybe it's because I've had several Viogniers recently, and maybe the crisp citrus and vibrancy of it is missing in this one, because I hadn't had a red or something like that in between. It's very good. I mean, like, if this is normally a $30 bottle of wine, and from the other websites I could find it on, it's not a Total Wine, but the other websites I could find it on, they seem to be selling it for $30 still, or $28 or so. There wasn't a lot of it made because the winery is kind of small. Virginia wineries aren't usually very large. But it's very good, but it seems to be missing something. And again, I don't know if it's this specific bottle, maybe because I've just recently had a bunch of Viogniers, but definitely worth checking out, especially if you can find it at Kroger in the Hampton Roads area. It's early January of 2019, so good luck finding it. But a very solid bottle of wine.
Well, this is one of the lesser known grape varietals that Virginia is, I guess, more known for. Is Viognier.
Yeah, this is apparently Virginia's wine varietal.
Yeah, which is interesting because this is also the white varietal that Texas does very well, particularly the Texas High Plains. And it's not I won't say it's uncommon, but it is a less common white varietal in the United States.
I mean, it was almost extinct in the 1930s.
Yeah, exactly. So they, I guess, more recently discovered, and by more recently, I mean within the last 20 years or so, that Texas, which has a very young wine industry as far as modern wine is concerned, they've been doing Viogniers here now, particularly in the High Plains, and there's one in particular that I drink frequently, which is the McPherson Viognier. One thing that you kept pointing out, that it does have kind of a Chardonnay quality to it, and I agree that I'm not a huge fan of Chardonnay, but this is sort of like a dry Chardonnay, but I think it's a lot less generic tasting than Chardonnay typically. So
I agree. No, I agree with that assessment altogether.
But it's a good alternative, I think, to Chardonnay. If you're a person,
100%.
If you're a person who's listening to the show and you kind of want to open your palate up and you like Chardonnay, I think Viognier is a really good step toward a more complex, more interesting wine. The ones here, I haven't had the one Mason that you had, but the McPherson one that I drink frequently, I think it has a lot more of a distinct floral taste, like more along the lines of like blossoming orange trees. My Aunt Ronnie Sue used to have an orange tree in the front of her house when I was a little kid. And whenever I have this like very, very strong memory sense, like scent connection. Mm-hmm. And whenever I drink something, it reminds me of somebody or a place or a time. And when I'm drinking the Viognier, it reminds me of when Ronnie Sue used to live down in, I think it was Orangevale actually, and she had the orange tree in her front yard. And when it bloomed, you could smell these, like, I guess, orange blossoms. And that's kind of what the aroma of Viognier, at least the McPherson Viognier, reminds me of. And it also has a much more, like I would say Chardonnay a lot of times has kind of an appley taste. I would say that this is much more along the lines of a less sugar, like this is a weird way to describe it because peaches are so sugary, but it's like a less sugary peach mixed with like a nectarine. Like, so it's got that kind of like plumminess to it a little bit, but it's like, it's not sugary. It's more like a peachy nectarine characteristic.
It's light citrus.
Yeah, exactly. It's like, a light citrus. It's more floral, and not sweet. Usually they're dry. I think you could probably get sweeter Viogniers, but they tend to be fully fermented and having almost no sugar in them. But because they have a stronger citrusy, fruity flavor, or sometimes appley, sometimes peary, since they have these additional flavors, they can kind of seem sweet, even though they're not technically sweet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think this is the uniqueness of like grape varietal. Mm-hmm. So like, a cab generally is fully converted for sugars, but they're not sweet. Sweet isn't the right word. There's something bright about these. And again, cabs can be bright too, but like there's a higher acidity to them, or maybe it's a more tannicness to the red. I hate to use, because like cabs aren't always necessarily aggressive. Like Pinot isn't an aggressive wine. Mm-hmm. At least the one we had wasn't like aggressive, but it was cab.
Right.
Whereas like, the cheap cabs are kind of like punchy.
Yeah.
Like I listened to the Dan Carlin World War I, and he's always talking about like a drunk prize fighter. Mm-hmm. Like cabs and Chardonnay kind of like are those classic, big production varietals.
Yeah.
Where, and here's the thing, like I'm sure a $90 cab is a wonderful bottle of wine.
Well, I mean, we know that it's a wonderful bottle of wine. We've had a $90 cab, a $95 cab.
No, excuse me, Chardonnay.
Oh, Chardonnay. Oh, I see what you're saying.
Yeah. Like I'm sure like a $90, $80-$90 bottle of Chardonnay is really good. And I'm sure like, Jackson or somebody, kind of who's better experienced in varietals in production areas could probably point out a $15 bottle cab that is Chardonnay that is representative of Chardonnay and would get the Chardonnay point across. Whereas, you and I have like, barefoot Chardonnay, and it's not that it's a bad bottle of wine. Mm-hmm. It's just, it isn't.
It's just not what we're looking for. Yeah.
I'm sure there are times where it'd be just what we're looking for, but it's like, I rather spend a little more money and get a off-brand Riesling.
Yeah.
And the acidity on that, and I'll drink a sweet or a semi-sweet Riesling, whereas you don't like the sweetness as much, but that's just one of those things where, oh my goodness, I think excuse me, it has this like, it's what I want Chardonnay to be.
Yeah.
And maybe like if we ever got into Chardonnays, we'd find the winemakers who are experimenting with like fermentations and stuff like that, and trying different things. So, we might find those ones where it's like, oh, this is really unique. But like most Chardonnays to me are like buttery white wine, but not like the new oak butteriness to it.
Yeah.
It's just kind of like, this is the varietal.
Yeah.
And it just doesn't do anything for me. But like, as Jacob said, like if you like Chardonnay, you probably will really like Viognier. Mm-hmm. And with Viognier, like especially if you're in Virginia, because it is a pretty heavily produced one here. Well, it is and it isn't. It's what we're kind of known for. You can get some pretty good, pretty good examples of the varietal, and not at a huge cost. Now, if you're used to spending $7 on a bottle of Chardonnay, you're not getting Viognier for that cheap. At least not anything that I've seen. I'd still be willing to try it at $7.
Yeah, well, and kind of like staying on the notes of white wines, I've actually been branching out a little bit into semi-sweets. Mm-hmm. And there's another one that I would say is Chardonnay similar, but not, I wouldn't even say Chardonnay similar exactly, but it's a white wine that I think if you like Chardonnay, you might like this as well. And it's a good opportunity to explore something a little bit different, and that's Albarino.
The Williamsburg winery does like 100% Albarino.
Oh, really? Have you had it?
No. I was looking at their website. I thought when you come out to visit in the spring, we would go.
Okay, we should go up there because I am going to come out there. I'm going to try to come out for a couple of days at least, and I think in March.
Okay.
So we'll try to do that.
Yeah.
But kind of going back to the Albarino, my only complaint with the Albarino that I've had is that for some reason McPherson makes them like ridiculously tall bottles, so I can't stand them upright in the refrigerator. And so then I have to drink it all. But they're usually low alcohol, so it's not terrible. The other white wine, so one kind of on Albarino, a characteristic that I've noticed about a lot of white wines is they are much more floral. Like that's the only way I can describe it. They're much more flowery than a lot of the reds. They describe Albarino as having a botanical aroma, and I'm not exactly sure what that means. But it is different, but it's similar enough.
I think botanical, if you're kind of, we're in a flower garden, but not like a production flower garden.
Okay.
Like kind of like the Norfolk Botanical Garden, where you have the smell and background of Virginia forest, with flowers.
Okay, like I could see that. Then that would make sense. I don't have any memories that jump to me or whatever that reminds me of it. It's actually, you know who would be great to ask about this? I'm sure you can guess, Mason.
I would guess Jackson.
Yeah, and I think the reason is because I think it's actually native to Glacia. And so he probably has a lot to say about it, or he probably knows a lot. So Jackson, one of these days we'll do an episode with Albarinos, and maybe you can tell us a little bit. But also in the same vein of white wines that can be semi-sweet, some of them are dry, that I don't think are terrible. And this is coming from a heavy red wine drinker. Petite Manseng is, I think, also good for people who probably like Chardonnay and want to kind of branch out a little bit. I think they're actually called something else besides Petite Manseng, but I think they're from southern France or maybe from northern Spain. I'm not 100% sure, but they are a lot more peachy and apricot-y than other white wines, I think. And I've had one or two. As I said, I'm trying to branch out a little bit into white wines just to kind of make myself a little bit more well-rounded, particularly for the show, but just for my own gains, I guess. And then there's a German white varietal that I can never pronounce, that I've always thought, actually, I think it might be a blush. Now that I think of it, I haven't had it, but I've always thought that maybe it's something you would like to try, but it's like, I'm not even going to try to pronounce it. It's a GEWU with 2 dots over it, RZTRAMINER. So it would be like Gewürztraminer.
One more time.
GEWURZ.
Gewürztraminer.
Yeah, I have no idea how to say that, dude.
Yeah.
So
you've had this.
I have? Okay.
I think
it's a blush. I'm not sure if we've had it or not, but it could be a white wine. But it's on my list to try, and the only reason it's on my list to try is because I think it's like an alternative to dry Riesling, and I've always wanted.
The one that I'm thinking of, and I might be, the German might be different. It was a very, very sweet, cheap wine that we had one time. It was remember the time we had a planning meeting?
Oh, that's right. Yeah. And I wasn't crazy about that one. Okay. So interesting. Okay. Then I have had that. So it's on my list to try, but I've been told that if you like Viognier, then Petite Manseng, this German one, certain types of dry Chardonnays, those types, Albarino, are all going to be good ones for you to try out, just to kind of branch out a little bit. And that's kind of what the show is about. Even though this is a Liberty-oriented show, it's more of a wine-oriented show, and we want people to try new things, and we want to try new things. So, and we actually had recently our first ever suggestion, and we're going to try to do an episode on that. And before the show's over, I'll plug that individual because they suggested it to us, and I've got another plug that I wanted to do for the show, but we're going to save those to the end.
Okay.
But let's go ahead. You want to move on, or do you want to?
I think it's time to transition.
Yeah, I think it is time to transition. And what I wanted to transition into, Mason, is one article that kind of caught a news article from Fortune that caught my attention. I read a lot of the financial magazines and stuff, Wall Street Journal and Fortune and Forbes and that sort of stuff, just because they're interesting to me. But an article that came up in Fortune this week was about the shutdown and the
government shutdown.
The government shutdown, which I guess we're, 13 days into that at this point? Or 12 days maybe?
I don't know. I'm not paying attention to it.
Well, I mean, and rightfully so, because it really doesn't mean anything to the average individual.
Well, I mean, living in Hampton Roads, it means a huge amount. But
I guess that's true. Yeah, there's some people who are missing their pay and stuff like that because it's such a heavy government. Very government community. But one of the things that this affects is, and they point this out in the article, is our favorite bureau, the Alcohol and Tobacco Tax and Trade Bureau. And
also known as the fuckers.
Yeah, exactly. Who are in control of very strange things. And one of the very strange things that we've talked a lot about is that they're in charge of American viticulture areas, deciding, is this Willamette Valley or is this Russian River Valley or is this, Umpqua Valley or, all those types of things. But they're also in charge of approving the labels on new beer and new wine. And this is what the Forbes article is about, is that right now it's not a problem, but we'll see how long this government shutdowns last. I mean, for you and me, I kind of hope it lasts a long time so that people can adapt and move beyond it and realize that the government's not that important. But it does kind of put a hamper on people trying to get their labels approved so that they can sell beer and wine. And right now you can submit, according to the article, you can submit all the labels you want. They're just not going to be approved until after the government shutdown is over and the appropriations have been restored. So I guess, I'm trying to think of how to transition this into how this is going to affect, because from what the article says, it's really not that important because usually the labels are submitted months ahead of time and then approved. And then as we learned in the copper cane case, even if they're approved later on, they could be rejected. But
well, I'll use an example as you think about it a little bit.
Yeah.
So they're planned and approved months ahead of time, but beer and wine aren't immediate things. Mm-hmm. So if you're thinking about launching a new beer for the summer and you're going to roll out a new label for it and everything like that, you're trying to get that approved now, especially if you're a small brewery. Mm-hmm. Or let's say that you're a brewery that launched yesterday, you have all the varietals you want, you have the labels picked out, and then you find out this thing is something that you're required to do. Mm-hmm. Or even worse, one of the things that we saw is apparently if you're going to use new ingredients, which I don't really know what that means, you're supposed to get their approval.
Right. So I think what that means is that you need to get their approval if you want to make and sell. Let's say that no beer has ever used raw rutabaga, ground up and mixed into the post-fermentation process or something like that. So now you want to sell this rutabaga beer, which, now that I've thought about it, that might be a good beer because I like rutabaga pie. But let's say you want to include rutabaga in your beer, and nobody's ever used rutabaga before. My guess would be that you have to submit to them that you want to include rutabaga in your beer and then sell it. And then they have to approve whether or not this is an okay additive or not. Yeah,
see, that's the thing is I can't imagine it's that light, let's say. Because if you're people put but people have been putting citrus peel and not oregano, but those sort of additional things into beer for a very long time. I can't imagine that the article would go out of the way of pointing out something. There's not that heavy of an experimentation, let's say, that I could imagine they're trying to point this out. I really think it's if you've already had a pre-approved thing and you're modifying it, you have to get approvals again. Now, maybe somebody out there knows what this means. Maybe we have some brewers or somebody like that who does commercial production of any alcoholic things that understands what this actually means and can give us a little bit of better insight. But I can't imagine, I don't disagree that you probably have to get the rutabaga thing approved.
Okay.
But I'm betting it's way more restrictive than that. Or more, you more frequently have to get approval than that. Because why else would it be a thing? You know what I mean?
That's true. Yeah.
The level of, I don't want to use the word malevolence, but why else would it come up is what I'm thinking. But yeah, that's the thing that's so insidious about this is if you're going to be a new brewery, well, let's say I'm going to brew and I'm going to brew in not Leesburg, but Farmville, Virginia, which is very central Virginia, kind of hard to get to. There's not a lot of highways that go there.
That's where my cousin lives in Farmville.
Which one?
Robert, the professor.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah, it is. It's like it's out in the middle of nowhere. It's very difficult to get there.
Yeah, but it's like a big town.
Yeah,
for the area.
Exactly.
So like, I'm going to produce a brewery there, and I'm not going to export anything. I'm going to sell on premise. I apparently have to have federal approval.
Yeah.
Why?
That's a good question, because according to this article, if you want to open a new brewery or a new winery or a new distillery or whatever, you need to have federal approval to open up a new site, and not just a new individual, not just a new one in general. Any individual location, you need federal approval for that.
Let's just take like constitutionalism as a thing.
Yeah.
What does the like I'm not interacting in like interstate trade.
Right.
Now, like, I guess their argument of like, what was the argument? Like, oh, by only selling internally, you're still affecting, macro level trade or some bullshit like that. But like, what? Like, this is one of those things of like, I really wish Trump would just like kind of review things like this and be like, yeah, I was looking at it and I don't understand why we're spending however many billions of dollars we are on this bullshit.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I don't know. It's a weird, I don't know.
Yeah,
it was a weird article. It really caught my eye, and I wanted to talk a little bit about the shutdown just because it is hot news, and I wanted to know, does this affect what the industry that you and I are most interested in, alcohol and just alcohol in general?
And that's the thing is like, that's what's so like, what people don't seem to understand about the government is how insidious it is. Like, you can't open a brewery in XYZ place that has no intention of going to a big national without the federal government's approval.
Yeah. It's so bizarre. It's such, like, I didn't realize until now you and I are talking about it, how annoyed you were about this, because you and I texted back and forth a little bit about it, and to me it was just kind of like, oh, they're at it again. But like, clearly this is like a very visceral response for you. So I think that's interesting.
An entire bottle of wine in for the day.
That's true. Yeah.
But like that's the thing. Like that, one of the things that, and I like where we've been going as a show.
Yeah.
And I understand and appreciate cultural, like a lot of, like when you were on the Fadcast.
Yeah.
And then they were talking about how we aren't always so ham-fisted about our politics.
Yeah.
And no offense to Bird or Carr, but I was like, have they listened to the show?
Right.
Because to me, like, it seems like we're always like, effing government.
Well, you know what? And I actually, and I'll do this plug right now. I was on Sounds Like Liberty, and I'm not sure when that episode's going to come out, but
I am patiently waiting for that.
Okay, yeah, I think it's a good episode, or at least I felt good recording it, and I think that it's actually a very interesting show. I'm going to plug it again at the end of our episode, just because I've been listening to them lately. It's kind of since they asked me to be on their show, I'm the type of guy who I don't like to be unprepared. So when they asked me to be on the show, I went back and listened to like 30 of their episodes. Well, I don't think they have 30 episodes. Well, maybe they do. I don't remember how many episodes, but I went and listened to like 15 episodes in a row. The one with Bob Murphy, where he talks about Les Miserables, because apparently that's his jam. I listened to the one with Rollo McFrugal, who's from the Rollo and Slappy show. Sherry Voluntary was on recently, who's got the Postcards from Somalia podcast. They've had a lot of really good guests on, and a lot of very interesting guests. So I went back and I listened to a lot of those just to see what the show was going to be, what I could expect, and all that sort of stuff. But one of the points that I tried to make on that show, and through the conversation with them, I was getting at, is that it's not exactly that I want to separate our cultural, our lives from the politics, because as like you and me both know this, as like pretty hardcore ANCAPs, and my wife also a pretty hardcore ANCAP, like it affects every single aspect of my life. It's like being a Christian. It's like, no, this is all stuff. I mean, I don't know about atheism, how that affects you, Mason, but for me, like, my religion does also very strongly impact my entire life on a day-to-day basis. And my response to somebody mentioning Woodrow Wilson, for example, is such a visceral anti-Woodrow Wilson response, and it does affect me greatly. But the point, I guess, of trying to bring the second wave of a libertarian podcast, or maybe we're the third, I'm not sure, but whatever it is, this kind of second wave that is not so heavily focused on the politics and philosophy, but more focused on a wider range of interests, because it's a good gateway for other people. They can see that, like, we're not only focused on politics and that sort of stuff, but like as Carr said, the people who are already anarchists are already on board with the perspective we're going to have on alcohol and wine. The people who are not where we are already on board with liking wine. or liking beer or liking whatever it is that we're going to be talking about that's going to appeal to them. And for you and me, it's wine. And we're going to start doing, starting 2 weeks from now, I guess we're going to be doing monthly installments of Jory Lindsay's beer recommendation of the month or whatever. So yeah, her and I are trying to organize that. So she liked it. It was a pretty popular episode, third most downloaded episode as of right now. And she's happy to do a beer review once a month with us.
Well, I will say thank you, Jury. I really enjoyed that segment. As I've always mentioned, I enjoy the family history. But this is one of the things that, and maybe like my memory of the show, since you haven't been here, is different than us being in your dining room, living kitchen room thingy that was that apartment where, like, to me, we always were talking about like the politics heavy, and I want to continue doing that, but it's not that I don't want to talk about the politics. It's that what I would like for this type of show, or like the Sounds Like Liberty show, what they're trying to do, or what the Fags are trying to do over at the Fagcast, is sort of introduce the wider community to libertarian culture. So or anarchist culture. There is a culture around this, and we're not only hyper focused on politics, but our politics affects every other aspect of us. So like, there's tons of other stuff. Like I could easily do a hardcore libertarian show on sci-fi, and actually you probably could too. Yeah. And that's the thing, is like what I think people who don't live the life that we do, and this isn't from an anarchist perspective, but like even like socialists and communists and, heavy Republicans and Democrats, however your political position stands, you can't help but hear a position and viscerally respond to what's going on, like especially from like a political standpoint. Like, both of us really enjoyed pretty much every show Anthony Bourdain did. Yeah. And when we heard that he had killed himself, we both had not different responses, but different levels along the same spectrums. Yeah. Sorriness for his family, sorriness for him to feel that he didn't want to live anymore, or, people murdered him, whatever the position is that, we ultimately come down on. I do question some things about how it was handled by the French government, and then, that takes us back along the path of government, what's it doing sort of things. But like we were watching the 11th season, my wife and I, this weekend, kind of trying to find something to watch that wasn't, King of the Hill again, or, something like that. And he did this episode on West Virginia, which, like, I almost was texting you about, like, what if West Virginia came back to be part of Virginia? Like, because West Virginia is so deficient in so many things. Like, what if, like, they came back to be part of Virginia to kind of, like, suckle on the teat of Virginia, like that. And like it was this weird, like, I want West Virginia back because I love, like, you see these still shots of West Virginia and the mountains and the hollers and like this very Appalachia, which is kind of like it's not California mountains, it's definitely East Coast mountains. But it is so beautiful and serene, and like the people were so friendly, but like his, like, just how the government is better, like it's just like sucking up to the teat of the government ruined this place.
Right. Well, this is a really good transition into another topic that I just kind of wanted to touch on. Have you heard? So the UK has a new minister position. I don't know exactly.
2018, early 2018.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yes.
According
to the one article I could find on it.
Okay, so I don't know why it's coming up so much. Victoria listens to Wall Street Journal a lot. You're right. It is January 17, 2018. I've never heard of this position, and I don't understand exactly
it's
how.
It's not a cabinet level position.
Okay, so they have a minister for loneliness. And my immediate response to this was kind of like, this is absolutely ridiculous. But at the same time, I do think loneliness is a problem, especially for me, who, like, I've been lonely in my life, but I've always blamed my loneliness on coming from a family that's as big as mine and then going to living by myself. Was like, it was a bad transition. I didn't like it. Yeah. And I've never really wanted to interact with anybody, but I like people being around. So like when I heard this, I was like, well, I could see loneliness being a problem. I think it's ridiculous that they have a minister for loneliness, especially since, like, that sounds like an insult. Like when you're like sisters having a bad day when you're kids, and she's like, man, my life sucks or whatever, or like, I have no friends or whatever, it seems like the brother would come in and be like, what are you, minister for loneliness? Like it sounds like an insult. So, so like when I heard that, I was like, is this a joke? Because Victoria was listening to it on Wall Street Journal podcast. I was like, is this a real position? She's like, yeah, it's a real position. I was like, this is bizarre that they have it. But then like I started looking at what other ministers there are, and they have ministers for all sorts of bizarre stuff. So, but one of the things, go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, like, one of the things that, like, the problem is the word minister for the way you were originally looking at it. Because this is like committee for this in the Senate or the House, where like, you know, there's millions of them, or not millions, but there's a bunch where you're just like, that's a thing. Yeah. Like, or like the, you know, the government grant for this, it is ridiculous.
Well, you know, one of the things, so that was my immediate response, was just like, this is ridiculous and silly. My secondary response though was that if there really is a loneliness epidemic, and the information that they cited, I have an NPR article about it. And you know, NPR, take it or leave it, but they kind of were going over that, like in the UK, the figures are that more than 9 million people in the UK always, or this is a quote, always or often feel lonely. And then it also says that around 200,000 older people have not had a conversation with a friend or relative in more than a month. And I don't know if I believe that. That might be true, but I don't know. I need to look more into the statistical research of it. But even if it was, you know, 1 million people, it would still be, that seems like a big deal. Now, they also kind of went into the health effects of this, and they were saying that the research shows that loneliness is as bad for your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. That seems like a stretch, but maybe. It also has the same effect as being obese. That was a less radical study. So
a less radical study? I think being obese is like a massively larger impact on your health than smoking 15 cigarettes.
You think so? Okay, I would have to look into that. I'm not sure. But one of the things that this triggered in my mind, and you know how like my mind works, it goes like it jumps from topic to topic, and what it triggered my mind was the government intervention in communities that has gotten rid of things like fraternal organizations. And I would say that in the articles that I was reading about this, they blame a lot of this on modern society, people living further away from their families, the internet, cell phones, people not interacting as much with each other, being able to order things online, all those types of things were being blamed for people not interacting with each other. And so now we've got to have the government come in and force people basically to interact with each other so we can solve this loneliness problem. So, but I see a much more sinister government cause of this, if it is indeed as big of a deal as it is, and that is that since the government has instituted such a, quote unquote generous welfare state, you've gotten rid of a lot of community-based solutions such as fraternal organizations, mutual aid societies, these types of things, because there used to be such a big stigma for taking what I would call very antisocial solutions to your problems, such as government charity, or it would be charity, but government subsidies or whatever, dole, as opposed to being a member of a fraternal organization or a mutual aid society, which is a very community-oriented, I'm in a bad spot, you can help me, and later on maybe I'll help you, and it's structured in such a way that you don't have as many free riders as in the welfare state. But at the same time, this took care of a lot of the loneliness aspects. If your family died before you died, or if your family lived far away from you, you could always go down to the lodge and you could hang out with your buddies or just people there and have some sort of human interaction.
Well, so there's a couple things that I want to point out, because I think we read quotes from the same rough article.
Okay.
Whether they were from the same article or, like so many places like reprint and stuff like that.
Right.
Like this one lady, like her complaint was she moved to a community that was a county that was further away from where she lived from, because she downsized her house because her son moved out of the country. But it's like, why did he move out of the country? And like, you can look at all these like government issues and causes. But like one of the things so every night after, when part of my daughter's wind down procedures are to, FaceTime call my parents.
Okay.
So
that's
FaceTime
kind of cute.
call
I didn't know that.
What was that?
I said that's cute. I didn't know that.
Yeah, and my daughter doesn't always talk to them, like doesn't always interact with them, but we do it pretty much every night. If we saw them during the day, we generally don't, but like they live 15, 20 minutes away.
Yeah.
You know how far that way they live from my house? Not that far.
Yeah.
So in a day and age where pretty much anyone can afford a cell phone, we're literally talking on a free to free internet service. We make this podcast through a free internet service. The idea that you haven't communicated with your family and that's something you want to do is, to me, is epidemic of like how dumb people are. And instead of focusing on like how the internet has provided all of these opportunities to enrich oneself, it's like, I don't have anyone to talk to.
Yeah.
You couldn't Skype your grandkids? You couldn't Skype your best friend? Like, you couldn't go on YouTube and figure out how to do that? Like, they present these like illogical arguments in like, oh, we need to spend money and figure these things out. And then you're talking about like fraternal organizations and these other things that people used to do. Like the UK, like what's one of our favorite shows? The Decemberists?
Yeah.
Like the club.
No, the Detectorists.
The Detectorists.
Yeah.
Decemberists is a band I enjoy. Well, I used to enjoy.
Yeah.
But like the Detectorists, it's literally about a club. And like that's one of the things that like I kind of, when watching the show, kind of like missed the idea of, and like is a club and these things.
Well, you and I met at a club, basically.
Yeah, and that's the thing is like people like you and I's generation like don't like to meet online, but like if you live in the UK, you don't live that far away from everybody else. Like you can get or go call these people and do these things, and like the idea that you need a government ministry to tell you that you should try Skype.
Yeah.
Like,
Right. Yeah, exactly. Or like that you need to spend, I think they were saying that like they appropriated like 500 million pounds or something like that for this. And it's like, I mean, spread across all of the people that are supposedly lonely, that's not that much money. But at the same time, like, I'm much more of a
9 million people are lonely. Yeah, 9 million.
Was it 9 million?
Yeah.
Okay.
500 million pounds.
Yeah. So it says 9 million people are lonely, and of those 9 million, 200,000 of them are quote unquote older people.
Yeah. Isn't that like 45 million pounds per?
No. Well, no, yeah, you're right. That's a lot of money. No. It's 45,000. 45,000? I don't know the math, but you could do the math if you want to real quick. But like my point, and being kind of a conservative-minded anarchist, I guess, is that I always kind of look back to the past and go like, well, why didn't this used to be a problem?
It's like, hang on a second.
Yeah.
Let me add another zero in there. It's like, so 500 million divided by 9 million is 55. That's
okay.
55 million pounds per 1 million persons.
That's a lot of pounds.
Yeah. That's friggin' ridiculous. Like I was lonely. I started a podcast with you.
Yeah.
Like,
well, I mean, like you and me both had like a time in our life where it was kind of like, I would say I was lonely, but it wasn't like clinical depression or anything like that. It was just kind of like, I don't really understand functioning in the world without a very large family coming and going all the time.
Yeah. And that's the thing is like, I'm at that point where like I weekly talk to you, and I talk to my wife every day because I live with her. I talk to my daughter every day because I live with her. I talk to my parents every day because I video chat with my daughter and my parents. But like I don't talk to like our other mutual friends every day. I try to like come up with reasons to communicate with them. Like Nate's not super responsive. It's not that I wouldn't text with Jackson, but like I don't have a direct means to communicate with Jackson or like the Fags or these other people in the Liberty movement that we know. Like I'm sitting here like often going like, well, how do I, like, what do I do? Like I want to do stuff. Like I routinely like kind of come up with like, how do I do stuff? But like, I don't go, let me look up a government program. Let me spend $500 million.
Yeah. Well, I mean, like when you and I were out of high school, I think you and I have had this conversation before. Part of the reason why we started going to the libertarian stuff was because we were like, well, I don't know how to make friends now that we're not in school.
Well, like I started going to libertarian meetings because I moved back after being away for 3 years, and like my core friend group didn't live here or didn't interact the same way anymore.
Right.
And I was just like, oh, I'll go to this thing. And then it was like, I met you, and it was like, game over.
Right. Yeah. So, I mean, that's kind of like where I'm getting at is that like you and I did seek out these more or less community-oriented type things, and that used to be the norm. You would have a church, you would have a fraternal organization, a mutual aid society, one of these types of things. And a lot of those types of organizations, the church has changed quite a bit, and I would argue the church has changed a lot because of government intervention and propaganda. Yeah. But also the mutual aid societies just don't really exist as much as they used to. I mean, there are still fraternal organizations. You've still got, watch out conspiracy theorists. You've still got the Freemasons. You've still got
the Rotary Club.
The Shriners.
Knights of Columbus.
Yeah, the Lions.
Well, Shriners are Masons.
Yeah, I mean, you've got a lot of these groups still that exist that you can go join. And there's still churches that do have a lot of different types of functions for people who, want. I mean, one of the big things that when I used to go to the Baptist church a lot, one of the big things that we did was invite somebody over who didn't have a family for after church lunch at our house. It was like, look, they don't have anything to do. A lot of times they were just really obnoxious people who you just didn't want to be around, but everybody needs.
They did have a family, they just didn't want to see them.
Then that's probably what it was. The family was just like, ugh, I can't stand to be around this. But people kind of become that way when they are, starved for this interaction. And I don't disagree with some of the stuff that they're saying in the article, that a lot of modern technology makes it, I wouldn't say counterintuitive, but it makes it difficult in a different way to interact with people. But I mean, that's really all I had to say about that article. I think that there's a really good article on Mises by Joshua Fulton. I think actually we brought this article up before, and the article is called Welfare Before the Welfare State, and it's largely about mutual aid societies. I encourage everybody to go read that, and it's what kind of came to my mind when I heard on the Wall Street Journal podcast about this Minister of Loneliness. Is it may legitimately be a problem, but it's likely a problem that is caused by the government intervention. And I think that you and I have pointed out a couple of places where it is very likely caused by the government, and that the government is not going to solve this problem, especially with a £500 million appropriation to deal with it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's I think that's a kind of a good closing note. It's if you're looking for the government to solve your problems, especially ones that manifest themselves because of government action, you're looking in the wrong place.
Yep. I agree. So let's go ahead and wrap it up with another recap of your wine, Mason, because I know that our New Year's resolution this year is not to ramble for 3 hours, but to only ramble for 2 hours.
Yes.
And actually, I think we're getting close to an hour at this point. So let's try to keep this under at a reasonable amount of time so that we can put out 2 episodes a week instead of just one.
So I had the Viognier 2015 from the Tarara Tarara Winery out of Leesburg, Virginia. As far as Vigniers go, this is definitely a good introduction. Very citrusy, kind of on the taste, bright. Definitely a good white wine flavor. I got it at Kroger. I got it on sale. They say it's supposed to be like $30. I got it for $12.38, which is a great per glass wine price. I got it for 13.3% alcohol by volume, 3.6 pH. For a Viognier, it's not exactly what I was looking for because it's a little more towards Chardonnay, but I don't know if it's specifically this bottle because I think I had 2 bottles of this recently, or I had a different bottle of this previously, the same, everything the same except for just literally a different bottle. And I seem to remember it being a little different, but yeah, it's a wine variety that I am definitely going to keep in my wheelhouse. Good acidity to it, but not overpowering, and still kind of sweet, even though it had 100% supposedly of the residual sugars consumed.
Okay. Well, I mean, to me, that sounds like something I want to try. I did look for it here, but it sounds like it's more of a Virginia area thing.
Yeah.
So maybe when I'm out there, we can track one down, or we can get something similar and try that together.
Yeah.
Let me go ahead and do a couple of plugs for external people before we do the plugs for our own show. As you guys heard, we mentioned the Fadcast a lot. That's the Friends Against Government with Car Campit and Bird Arcus. They are a lot of fun to listen to. They range in topics from like very serious topics such as pirate radio and ending the war on drugs, and all the way to things like the Goat Man of Lake Worth. So they have a very wide range of stuff. It can be conspiracy, it can be political, it can just be comedy kind of stuff. It's a really great show. I enjoy it a lot. And because they announced it on their last episode, I'll go ahead and announce it here. Car Campit and I are working on a possible libertarian gathering in Texas. Hopefully, Mason, you'll be able to come out, and hopefully Bird will be able to come out too, and it can be like a power hour of the Tasting Anarchy, Friends Against Government, and any other types of podcasters who want to come out type of thing. It's probably going to be lots of drinking, lots of camping, and whatever other types of shenanigans down near the Austin area. But we'll give more information about that later. Another plug, I also mentioned this earlier, Sounds Like Liberty, really great show. I'm a guest on it in, I don't know when my episode's going to come out, but I did an interview with them. I'd like to have them on to do an interview with you and me, Mason. But we'll see, what happens with that. But check out that show. The very amazing Bob Murphy is on there. His episode's really great. So that one I highly recommend just because his musical taste is very interesting. I knew he was a musician, but he has like very specific things that he really likes. Les Mis, the musical portion of Les Mis is like his wheelhouse. I thought that was really interesting.
But yeah, but it comes from his mom. I mean, it's a very sweet episode.
Yeah.
I definitely listened to that one. But they also have, Mark and Mark Clare and
That's right,
Brian McWilliams from Lions of Liberty. I mean, they have a lot of. So this is one of the things I really like about the libertarian movement. They've got Bob. They have Mark and
Rollo McFrugal was on there. Brian McWilliams. A lot of really interesting. Sherry Voluntary. A lot of really great. Guests. So I recommend the podcast, especially if you have any interest in music. They have an interesting format of the show, so go ahead and check them out.
What I was going to say, just real quick, is Bird and Carr have had Scott Horton on. They're helping Scott Horton do stuff for his new book.
That's right.
The greats in libertarianism aren't what podcast that is, and this is not a knock on fags or Sounds Like Liberty, but do they have what Democrat podcast of their level as not Donald Trump, but Hillary Clinton, or somebody like that?
Yeah, some of the greats. Our equivalent.
Like her campaign manager or something like that. And here Scott Horton is on, the Fadcast, and those guys have, 40 episodes or so, which is, there's a little bit more than us, but it's not like they have 155 episodes
right.
And they've had Tom and these other people. Scott's a big name.
Huge name. Well, and for, just for you and me, somebody that we immensely look up to.
Yeah, and that's what's so great about the libertarian sphere is you don't have to move far up from us to get to the shoulders of to be standing with Tom Woods in the room, sort of thing.
Exactly.
And so then Jacob, where can people follow you telling Pocahontas and 220th?
Okay, well, I mostly operate the Twitter, so it's at tasinganarchy.com. Earlier in the show, we also mentioned that we had our first ever request to do a show. That was from our friend on Twitter. It's Zarath Anarchy. That's his Twitter handle. It's at Zarath Anarchy. Also, there is another friend of ours on Twitter, Mr. Sue, Pseudo-Intellectual. He is doing a new podcast that I wanted to shout out. His first episode, I believe, comes out on Monday the 7th, January 7th, and it is just going to be called The Pseudo-Intellectual, and it's, just him talking about different liberty-minded things. That is, I believe, going to be on Dino's, that's the Dino of the Dino Files, who's another Liberty podcast. I believe that's going to be on his network, so check that out. He's been a lot of fun to interact with online. He's also had a couple of wine recommendations for us, and he's down in Austin, so I'm probably going to see him in the not-too-distant future.
Fantastic.
Also, one last plug for other podcasts before we wrap up and give our plugs once again, and that is Robbie the Fire Bernstein's Run Your Mouth podcast. He has been having a feud
Jacob.
Well, AKA Bird Archist.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Why are you giving Bird more room?
Right. Yeah, exactly. So Robbie the Fire, AKA Bird Archist, has another podcast called the Run Your Mouth podcast. They have been staging a pseudo fight, even though it's the same person, between the Fags and Run Your Mouth. But Run Your Mouth is a fun podcast. The alternative personality of Bird Archist, Robbie the Fire, is also a very funny comedian. So check out that podcast when you get a chance. And if you're in New York and he is doing stand-up near you, go ahead and check out his stand-up. He's also the producer of Dave Smith's Part of the Problem podcast. So check that out.
Yeah.
Also, like I said, you can talk to me directly if you want at Tasting Anarchy on Twitter. You can also email me at it's tastinganarchy@gmail.com. Am I missing any, Mason?
Tastinganarchy.com
That's
itself.
right. Right.
Our much beloved website that we apparently, I realize I haven't been posting the episodes to, and I thought we had some automation thing doing that.
I thought we did too, but I guess it's not working. So I'll try to figure that out. And then also, you and I just this year, let's try to start doing some reviews and stuff like that. It is difficult to sometimes sit down and write a review, but maybe what we should do, Mason, you and I should brainstorm a review template that is easy for us to fill out, and then maybe we can just fill out the template whenever we want to post something.
Yeah, exactly.
That'd probably be a good idea.
But so the only other thing that I have is, I came up with it before Dave Woods,
Dave Smith. Yeah,
I merged two of the best libertarians in my mind. If only Tom cussed like Dave.
Right.
Dave was clean as Tom. No, that we are secessionists.
No. Abolitionists.
Abolitionists. But, we are going to secede, and we're going. Our abolition is against the government. They don't deserve your respect. They don't deserve your time. They don't deserve your money. They put Lars Ulrich in jail for the rest of his life, and it is clear that every one of those people were more corrupt than anything Lars Ulrich ever did.
That is absolutely 100% true. So on that depressing note, which hopefully in the near future will become a less depressing note, because I think that he is most deserving of a pardon, and I believe that the universe or God or whatever will intervene, and hopefully he will get that pardon. So from Jake at Tasting Anarchy, stay free.
Stay free.
All right, have a good night, everybody.
Knock down windows and tear down doors. Drinking half gallons and calling for more. Drinking wine, sport you to drink wine. Wine, sport you to drink wine. Wine, sport you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Hoy! Drink it, man. Oh, give me some of that slop. Oh, pass that bottle to me. If you want to get along in Peterstown, buy some wine and pass it around. Age runs up to 49. All them cats, they love sweet wine. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Hoy! Wine, wine, wine. Elderberry. Wine, wine, wine. Cherry, cherry. Wine, wine, wine. Blackberry. Wine, wine, wine. Horton sherry. Wine, wine, wine. Oh, pass that bottle to me. Now down on Gill Street at Willie's Den, he wasn't selling but American gin. One soldier wanted a bottle of wine. He hipped that cat for $1 and a dime. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Pass that bottle to me. Now I got a nickel, have you got a dime? Let's get together and get some wine. Somebody's fifth and somebody's fourth. When you get together, you're doing things smart. Drinking wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine. Wine, sporty, you to drink wine.